Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Conscious Health podcast with my co host, David Ortega. And today we're looking at the ancient fire within us. And we just started the series last week, or last episode, we looked at water. And today we are looking at fire, and fire within the spiritual, mental, emotional aspect of things is yeah, it's so diverse when it comes into that spiritual aspect of it. I mean, fire changed the way we live. I mean, it provided, like, when we discovered fire, which some people say it was probably at least probably 400,000 years ago. Some astrological sites talk about the finding fire. I mean, it provided warmth, it provided protection from predators, cooks our food. Being Portuguese, we love food, so the food has to be involved in there somewhere, and we mentioned that with the water last time as well. It also created the light after sunset, which is pretty incredible. And it helped us to forge tools. And the big part of it is that social gathering, which a lot of us still gather around the fire and share stories. I mean, that aspect of, tradition of passing down the knowledge and wisdom, a lot of the times was, steeped around, sitting around a fire. So it created community. It's from a spiritual perspective, there's so much symbolism that comes into it. There's purification, there's you know, so many things that we connect to it. Fire as a consciousness. And then I worked with the various flames. So there's a lot of sacred flames that we talk about, which we can jump into as well. Um, but yeah, when you start looking at it as a place of emotions, I mean, like fire is energy. What
Mhm.
are your perspectives? Like, how does it connect into the body?
Well, it's very, very interesting the term fire in the body because people might imagine, let's say that you have this burning sensation in your throat or your reflux, any kind of indigestion, and all of those things, of course, are related to this fire, but it means also transformation. So
Mm.
many of the processes of our body, in fact, plenty or all the transformational process in the metabolism happen because of these reactions and this fire that needs to start those reactions. So in Ayurveda, that you also will talk about some of those concepts, it's called Agni, and that's
Hmm.
the name that in Ayurveda gives to this. But in the biological process is this continuous biotransformation that happens, and life cannot exist, and we wouldn't be able to absorb the nutrients without this breaking down of the matter and then rewriting that into the language of the body into human energy. So ATP, all of these processes, all of this synthesis needs some heat, needs some fire to be started, and that's the process of the metabolism, both sides, the anabolism,
Yeah.
which is the synthetic part of the metabolism, and the catabolism, that is the breaking down of the things, no?
Yeah, absolutely. And fevers as well. So fevers also come to break down
Yeah.
things and to shift the body. For us on an energetic aspect of it, it is burning. It's that it really is releasing the old in order to bring in the new. And I think nowadays, yeah, we move too quickly to dampen that heat as well in many ways. But from a personal growth perspective, and from a spiritual perspective, fire really represents the energy, like you say, that moves us beyond our comfort and into transformation. So we also see that within looking at the connection to the spiritual side. A lot of the times I use fire to burn away old identities. Or, for example, if we look at it from emotion, love ignites the heart. It challenges the temper. A lot of people And we talk about this in almost kind of like spiritual bypassing. So I can't feel lower vibrational frequencies, but I feel that all emotions are valid equally. And we tend to suppress anger. And for me, anger is it's fire. It's something
Yeah.
telling you that something is wrong. It's how you choose to direct it, is what is important. So, for example, that fire in your belly that we talk about when you have purpose, that, it comes in, it fuels action to get things moving, right? And, that energy of fire tends to awaken and illuminate truth. And many of us that are spiritual teachers or spiritual reminders, because I feel that we know people come, we don't teach anything, we remind people of each other's who we are or the information. It acts as kind of like a refining, right? So it's the experience really that strips away any kind of illusion so that the authentic self can sometimes emerge as well. So fire is a very interesting, and if we start looking at the zodiac as well, we start
Mm.
looking at those fire signs, and how different they are as well. But when we look at it from an astrological perspective, we need to bring in all those elements into balance, right? But there's usually one predominant element that we tend to work through as well.
I love that sharing that you gave because, yeah, people don't realize that many of our emotions are extremely important in the way they also impact the body and how we many times let those emotions to be repressed, to
Yeah.
be, let's say, to be labeled as negative, to be labeled as something that society is not approving or something like that. And by doing that, we just create uh, first a disorder inside of us. Second,
Mm.
we let that emotion to be kept, and emotions in the end, or in the chemistry language, they need to be transformed as well. They need this fire. So sometimes anger, as you mentioned, it's good
Mhm.
that you let it out and you don't repress it. Also, when you can't say certain things about some things, something related to your feelings, that is also repressed, and that reflects in your throat,
Mhm.
and that reflects in that burning sensation of your throat that is hurt. You can't speak, maybe you lose your voice, and
Yeah.
then all of those things represent the part of the process that was not really performed, no? So it's a very layer situation with fire because we have different levels of these processes that they can be represented by the different mechanisms of the body. For example, I will explain later once you give me your opinion on that, about the gut, about the liver, about how the cells
Mm.
use many of these assimilation of the energy, no?
Absolutely, absolutely. And then that's where a lot of inflammation comes in as well,
Mhm.
right? Which is very much arthritis. It is kind of like a repressed fire. It's one of those things of trying to control things. Whereas fire, a lot of the times, like we use fire to control fire,
Mm. Yeah.
right? So it's very interesting when we start looking at it from that perspective. And it's again, it's like I usually say that everything is needed. We dial everything. It just depends on how much we need and when,
Mm.
which becomes important too. And for us, fire, so I remember I'm usually quite zen and quite chill. And then I remember when I was pregnant, I started getting like my had no patience for nothing. And it was so interesting because I was like, oh my God, I feel alive. It was a different kind of like, attitude that was coming in. And I was like, oh my goodness, like, maybe we need a little bit of fire, right? Because if we don't have enough fire, we become depressed. We have no
Mhm.
direction. We don't know where, fire is, we use a lot of fire for sacrifice as well within, or an offering to work through. So we use a lot of fire in remembrance, in prayer, in healing, in gratitude as well. And that also has, I mean, gratitude has an effect in the body too.
Mm.
Right.
Yeah.
But fire can also be seen as an expression of hope. So when we're feeling hopeless, when there's no fire in the body, then like we were saying, you find those depression, we find all sorts of conditions that tend to, you know, suppress the immune system as well. So it's like it's where do we dial that fire? Too much or too little is it's finding what is the right temperament for the situations that we're dealing with.
And I love also the concept that you introduce about losing certain identities when
Hmm.
we put fire in the equation and we leave that old self to be burned down, and many old beliefs are being renewed, and we return. So making the comparison to nature, when in nature a fire is happening, it's to renew the land, it's to renew the soil, it's to give it more nutrients again from those
Yeah.
ashes. It also gets nutrients, and it starts creating life again. But it's a new kind of life. It's a new kind of beginning, let's say, that it's starting another process. If we could see our lives as a series
Hmm.
of, of chapters and things like a Netflix series,
Yeah.
we are we are making fire every time we passed one cycle
Yeah.
in our life, and we are just burning down many of the things that we don't want to carry on, and we want to keep making disorder in our body, no?
Absolutely. And that's why a lot of us talk about the rising of the phoenix. So this rising from the ashes is that renewal period that we come through. So it's about taking the wisdom from the old, but it's
Mm.
again, it's releasing, it's the fire helps us to let go of the old in order to bring in, but it also nurtures bringing in the new as well again, which is important. And when we go through that rebirthing process as well, it helps us to ask the questions really. I mean, like if we think about it as fire's transformation, like we spoke about, nothing that enters fire remains the same. And we are constantly moving. We are constantly shifting. Whether we're
Mhm.
having good times, that will change. Whether we're having bad times, that will, or, times for no, I wouldn't necessarily say bad, but those opportunities to grow, we learn as well. Almost like you
Yeah.
were saying, the wood becomes the ash, or becomes metal. So there's that part of transformation. Heating up clay becomes pottery.
Hmm. Yeah.
So there's so many ways where raw food becomes a different kind of nourishment. So it's always about, on the spiritual side, fire tends to represent that transformation of consciousness. And it helps us to ask the question, like you were saying, in that part of that cycle, who are we becoming in our new cycle? What identity that just before, what identity are we wanting to outgrow? And the fire helps us to move through that. It
Mm.
also helps to bring the hidden potential that's underneath the surface to surface,
Yeah.
right? Which is quite beautiful. And we often talk about our inner light, igniting that inner light that we have within us. And when we talk about that inner flame, we're looking at consciousness, we're looking at our intuition, we're looking at the wisdom that we have within us, we're looking at our soul's purpose, like I said earlier, but we're also looking at life force, like you were saying, the ATP, that energy that is needed, that is ignited to create the cells, so it's when we've lost our inner spark, as we say, we're unconsciously referring to this ancient symbolism of fire as our inner light.
Hmm.
So there's a few practices that can support this as well. Um, I was just thinking sometimes we find heat in the body that needs to be kind of like calmed down. And that's when we're looking at information, when we're looking at anger that's stuck, that's not expressed, that is repressed in the liver. When we're looking at that, grief that is stagnant and is not moving either. It's needing a bit of that fire. So practices, like we have some fire practices. So I work a lot with the violet flame of Saint Germain. So anybody that knows me knows that I work with the violet flame of Saint Germain. But the reason I'm saying this is because it's that aspect of transformation and transmutation and transcendence is what that brings into it, which like it ties into what you're saying in that space of bringing in that prayer. So we use the candle to symbolize that ancient spark. When we light a candle, we're actually opening up. To get really spiritual, we're opening up a portal. It's giving life to a new situation as well. And we use fire or burning of messages as sending messages to the other side too,
Yeah.
which is very interesting.
And it's also very, very interesting how this links to the physiological and science part. Now, in terms of how these processes in the body happen, the transformation doesn't happen all at once. It
No.
can't be like that. It occurs in a strict physiological sequence. And that sequence, for example, in the body is first the gut. It grows and it blends the mechanical and the chemical enzymes, and they let it break down in the stomach with the acids and all of those changes of the
Hmm.
pH of our body and the small intestine. And once you have this process, let's say, finished, then the liver starts in the sequence, and then the liver gives an hepatic sorting and the biochemical filtering of many of these substances, and it starts the process of releasing hormones that will trigger the activation of other helpers,
Hmm.
other enzymes, so that you can process many of these nutrients and they become absorbed. And finally, this part of the process, the cells, there is a tissue-specific assimilation. And in this tissue-specific assimilation, we are talking about this microscopic way of breaking down things into very, very molecular parts, into atoms even, and how the cells utilizes everything. It doesn't waste anything. It is just recycle. It is just return into a shape where it can be of use. And many of the things that cannot be used, well, they are detoxified by the system, no?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you're right. It's that turning that food into energy, it's looking at, yeah, you're right. When something is broken in there, it's stuck, as we were saying. So if we're looking at the digestive system, like you were saying, it's when we're holding on to stuff, right? It becomes sluggish. So there isn't enough fire there. Or if our filters in our liver aren't there, it starts to back everything else up as well. When we start looking at yeah, I start looking at like, the pancreas as well, and like looking at the diabetes, if we start looking at that from that perspective, is not finding that sweetness in life and not having that, wanting to move ahead. When fire is depleted, it's like we have chronic fatigue. It's all these systems are just sluggish. The filters are all backed up. You have low motivation if we start looking at it because it's so interconnected, and we feel cold. So if I
Mm,
look at it from a practitioner's hands, like when we're doing Reiki or any kind of energy healing, the body tends to actually heat up.
mhm. Yeah.
And it's depending on whatever energy is needed, but it's when we start looking at that, our hands become fire,
Yes, and you
which
feel
is
that fire in
interesting.
your hands.
You
You
do.
feel when you start doing this, let's say when you do the symbols in your hands and you just uh, do the processes of Reiki, you
Mm,
start feeling that kind of energy in your hands, and then you put your hands in the positions of the Reiki, and you start
absolutely.
feeling the heat passing through, even though you are not touching
Yeah.
the person, no? You are just putting the hands in a position where the heat can be transferred, the energy can be transferred so that they can heal. And this is also very, very important. And I think that nowadays there is an epidemic of many people that have this hypometabolism, which is
Hmm.
lowering your metabolic rate and your metabolic ability to burn the food and to use the nutrients
Hmm.
and to activate many of these mechanisms. And this hypothyroidism that we are seeing in
Hmm.
many people is creating also this obesity epidemic that we
Yeah.
can see. So it cannot completely, the metabolism cannot completely oxidize the substrate, the food.
Yeah.
It cannot break down, or it just uses many of these food as reserves because your metabolism is so slow. And that means also that you have been sedentary for a good time. So that's
Yeah.
why your body doesn't feel that activation, that energy that it needs to be moving. And in the Ayurveda system that is also linked to many of these
Mhm.
scientific principles, they call it that there is a sludge and there
Yeah.
is an ama. That's the
Yeah.
name in the Hindu tradition.
Yeah.
And this sludge is what creates that the mitochondria get like, let's say, they don't work first of all, and they start being slowed down. So the ATP process is also slowed down, so you don't have
Yeah.
energy.
Yeah.
And then this is the phenomenon that is recognized as storing many metabolic endotoxins, like lipopolysaccharides that come from
Mhm.
many of these bacteria that we are constantly also, let's say, destroying and using. And many of these, uh, they are called glycation end
Mm.
products. And these glycation end products come from the sugars. So instead of using these sugars to use that energy up, we store many of them, and the
Yeah.
others start creating this, again, this sludge. And that triggers the inflammation process overall.
Yeah.
No?
But it also triggers brain fog as well, like low
Yeah.
libido,
Right.
all sorts of things like that. And for me,
Yeah.
people usually tell me they're like, they have difficulty taking action and they're stuck. They feel stuck.
Mm.
And a lot of the messages that I get is actually you need to move. If
Mhm.
you want, and it's creating that heat to allow things to start actually moving. So going for a walk, dancing to music, doing kind of like, even if it's kind of like yoga, whatever it might be, when that fire is slow, we need to start speeding it up a little bit as well. Actually, it's very interesting. Iodine, just the story that I thought my brother is always cold. When there's an iodine deficiency, we're always cold
Mm.
as well. So it's quite interesting to see where that chemical balance is as well, right? So again, if like you were saying, so that is if like there is no fire, if there's excess of fire, which we've spoken about, is that inflammation, headaches also tend to be as well when there's too much going on. High blood pressure is another one that we forget when there's too much fire happening. Burnout. Burnout is connected to too much fire, going for too long, too high, not bringing in that balance or not allowing the things to support that fire as well. Difficulty sleeping is also excess of fire as well. Sometimes our brains just don't stop, going through that. And that tension in the body or restlessness is that there's too much fire. We don't have a balance that's coming into that as well.
Yeah, there is also that um, happening in a very wide, let's say, range of individuals. No, there is a lot of people that right now they are burning down. Even athletes, I keep seeing many of the athletes, mostly in the individual sports, where they were supposed to be in certain level, they were supposed to be winning tournaments or things like that, but they are not. They keep get injured or they keep get tired, just really tired, and we forecast this when we began our episodes of this year because we spoke about this fire horse year, no?
Absolutely.
And it's a
Absolutely.
double fire that is coming from this nature and these processes that the cycle is just giving us the opportunity to burn down many of the things that we don't need and to renew. But it's also giving us the opportunity to stop, to pause, and to analyze what is really working in our lives and what is not. No?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So and you're right. We start looking at what are the limiting beliefs, what are the fears, right? When we're getting rid of that, like what are we attached to? Like old identities is usually a big attachment that, or we're attached to an illusion, you know. When that releases, like we were saying, it brings in that sense of wisdom, that authenticity.
Mhm.
It brings in that looking at, our compassion, and we start to nurture that inner light that is within us, right?
Yeah.
Which is beautiful.
And at the deepest, let's say, let's keep talking about this microscopic level because I'm really passionate about this mitochondria and all of the things
Mm.
that they can do. Our mitochondria represents the fire store houses, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
because they produce the ATP and there are many reactions that happen. One of them, probably people that might remember their biology classes and they listen to a Krebs cycle. Well, this Krebs cycle is one of the most amazing metabolic pathways that represents a lot of the processes of breaking down and generating
Mm-hmm.
energy. Is one of the most, let's say, cost effective processes inside of us because it generates many of these coins that we are going to exchange in another part of the mitochondria, and we are going to create a lot of energy from that. But in order to do that, we need this energy to keep moving. When we perform any kind of exercise, we are becoming light, we are becoming this fire inside of us. And I usually see it when I go running and when I see some of the, let's say, the breakdown of my running and the kilometers and the speed that I went. It also gives you the amount of watts that you produce in
Mm-hmm.
each kilometer. And
Yeah.
and it's amazing how you can produce watts to light up a city just by doing an exercise and by turning on your
Mm-hmm.
mitochondria and keeping them healthy. If you are in a sedentary lifestyle, you are not using your mitochondria and you are making them weak. And they also, of course, they start dying and they start becoming slow. So all of
Yeah.
this happens, no?
Yeah, you're right. We also tend to see the, fire in the mitochondria in the sense of that transformation, like you were saying, from heat into light as well. But it's also the big part of it is like the fuel that gives us. So when we're running on empty, right, then we know that is needed. But it's a bigger aspect that's happening as well, because if we look at the mitochondria as well within fire and, you know, and our emotions, again, if it is, healthy, if it's there, it's supported, creates that space of a stable mood or that mental clarity or that motivation to actually get out there, and actually get that fire moving as well. But the thing is, as well, is it's also a great, it helps, it's resilient, it helps to make us resilient to stress as
Mm-hmm.
well. And it gives us that cognitive function that we need. Because when it's impaired, there's that fatigue, that burnout, that low motivation that tends to come in. But how it feels in the body is, I mean, joy feels energized. It's contagious. When people are happy and joyous, it's contagious. It feels energizing and it energizes everybody around us, right? When
Mm-hmm.
we're that space, when we're in love, it's expansive, right? When we're in fear, everything collapses, right? And we feel frozen. If we start
Yeah.
looking, there's not enough there. Grief feels heavy because it's that part of that sluggish, and anger feels hot. But it's like, it's all of these are valid as long as we experience them 100%, but move through them. So learning to work with the elements within our body, I think it's a great way to support those cycles. It's a great way to know how much too much, too little, not enough is important, right? That divine spark is that soul level aspect when we start looking at that. We call it life force, we call it chi, we call it prana, we call it soul light, I suppose. And that's what is beautiful when we start looking at it from a physical, mental, and emotional. And it's been proven as well that our thought processes, what we tell our body, it is received. So it's so important depending on, you know, what kind of thoughts are we firing to our body,
Mm-hmm.
you
And
know, and how fast are they, and how, are they, like, because they also are affecting us as well.
and you use the firing also, firing thoughts. So
Yeah.
we need this firing of thoughts. We need this connection of thoughts. We need this stimulation to live. And when we generate this metabolic equilibrium, this metabolic balance, what our body is doing is also generating defense,
Yeah.
generating resilience, generating and priming the immune system to work against any viruses. And this has been tested by my experience in many, many cases. And it's funny, but last year, all practically all last year, I passed a lot of time doing therapy, shadow work, and working with those ancient, let's say, toxic energies. And I released many of those things during last year. And this year that just begun 6 months ago,
Yeah.
almost 7 months ago, I have been in contact with many people that are sick, either stomach or colds or
Mm-hmm.
things, and I haven't been at all,
Yeah.
uh, let's say, contagious, let's say,
Okay.
or
Yeah.
affected by them, no?
Yeah.
And so that means that all of the work that we do, all of these processes that we leave behind, they keep recycling and making us feel more resilient, more in balance,
Mm-hmm.
more in this attunement with our bodies, and more in this vitality that you mentioned, that our
Yeah.
eyes are turning this light and we connect with our soul purpose, we connect with what we love to do, and we
Mm-hmm.
enter also into a zone of being focused in what we want, no? And that
Yeah.
takes away the brain fog.
Absolutely. And that brings me to looking at different ways that we can actually fuel our body. So from, the food that we eat fuels our body, the oxygen, our breathing. So many of us breathe very, very shallow. So it's actually that allows to fuel our body as well. Movement, as we said, is absolutely important. Sleep, restorative sleep. And you don't think of sleep as fueling us, but it does. It absolutely, it fuels us. And then sunlight. I mean, the
Mhm.
biggest fire that we have that gives life to all things is spending time in the sun helps to fuel our fire as well. And it helps us with that stress management part of it too. Meaningful relationships is the other one that fuels our fire as well. And again, having that sense of purpose. All of these things are great tools when we start to create habits around that nurture both our physical vitality and our capacity to engage with life, that really has this healthy aspect of fire because fire is more than just a symbol, right?
Mhm.
It lives within us. So every cell, like we said, contains fire or not, you know.
Mhm.
And again, it's like connecting to the flame within our body, the flame within our mind, the flame within our emotions, but our inner flame, which is beautiful.
Yeah. So how can we, let's say, summarize for people into three big takeaways of what fire represents in terms of the spiritual aspect?
So fire represents your consciousness. It represents that eternal fire that burns within you. It's almost kind of like it's the flame. Our soul is the flame that never that never goes out.
Hmm.
So how are we fueling that flame? Right? I mean, if we look at it, it's like if I bring in alchemy into it, it's a deep representation of transformation. So we're
Hmm.
constantly fire is part of that cycle. So it's how much or how little fire you need is become conscious as to how much we need and have a look at what is sluggish. Because whatever is happening to your physical body, there is an external representation. Our
Hmm.
external environment is a direct mirror to our internal environment. So if there's
Hmm.
not enough fire inside, there's not enough fire outside.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
And in terms of the science part, what I can tell people is that we need fire for every single process inside of us.
Mm.
We need that to break down the food we ingest. We need the fire to allow the enzymes, which are workers, helpers inside of us, to take these processes into a molecular level and to extract the nutrients, to give balance to all of the big processes of life, which are your gut, all the digestive process, your liver, the detoxification of many processes, the filtering of things, and we need that to fuel our our cells at the microscopic level to create energy, to feed
Absolutely.
the different pathways, to give it light, to give it this wattage of power, and
Yes.
and that will in turn give you resilience, immunity for any
Yeah.
viral or bacterial infection. It will give you, of course, purpose, and it will give you this mental process that is much clearer and where you can detect what kind of
Yeah.
activities turn on your light. No?
Absolutely. So keep that flame alive and light your way, light your own path, right?
Yeah.
It takes only one light in the vast of the darkness, it just takes one light, one spark to ignite. all of that to shed light on the darkness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. So let us know. We'll cover all of the five elements throughout the series. And yeah, let us know your thoughts on all of this and absolutely share and subscribe, as they say. And then if you're needing to get a hold of David or myself, our details will be in the descriptions and would love to hear your thoughts. Have an amazing week, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. See you next time. Bye.
Bye.